Thank you so much for coming out to support TED. It's really important, but I hate it when people applaud before you speak because it just sets the bar so high. So, it's the summer of love, 1967. But I'm not in Haight-Ashbury. I'm working at a state mental hospital outside of Detroit as a psychiatric aide on a ward for acute schizophrenics. I'd always been fascinated by the human mind. One of my earliest memories is of asking my mother when I was 5 years old how I could know that anything real existed outside of my head. When she assured me that she was indeed real, I wasn't in any way convinced. Walking through the locked door onto the hospital ward was entering another reality. Ludwig was nervously pacing the hall, as always, repeating red light, green light, red light, green light. Bruce was in the day room, delivering a speech from meticulously prepared notes to an unseen audience that wasn't at all happy with what he had to say. But of all my patients, I found Peter the most disconcerting. He would come up to me and say, "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" And despite my denials, he would continue, "You think I'm crazy, don't you? Well, you're the crazy one. I have a roof over my head, 3 meals a day, all the television I can watch, and I don't have to do a thing. You have to come here and work every day." I had to admit the validity of Peter's logic, and there was no reasoning him out of it. Nor could I convince Ludwig that he didn't need stoplights to ward off his demons, or Bruce that the hostile audience wasn't real. I could see that my patients lived in a world of their own making, and I had to ask whether we all did. I wasn't the only one questioning. This was the late 1960s, and the air was filled with speculation about the nature of reality and the smoke that generated a good deal of that speculation. But it wasn't just idle speculation. If the world existed in our heads and we changed our heads, then we could change the world. And the 60s was about both. Some years later, I found myself teaching at a remarkably undistinguished college in a small New England town. While I was there, this pristine little village was racked by controversy. The town had agreed to sell developers a ski area on the outskirts, and they'd then come back and requested a zoning variance to build condominiums alongside the runs. Half the town was in favor because of the promised economic benefit. Half was opposed because of what they feared it would do to the quality of life. So a town hall meeting was called to decide the question. The developers were up first. They presented a compelling argument that seemed to preempt any possible objections. When they were done, the moderator called for comments. An old Yankee stood up in the back of the room, looked at the developers, and said, "I don't know nothing about all these numbers, and you do seem like nice fellers to me, but you know, your request for a zoning variance reminds me of a friend that's always got to have a pickle with his sandwich for lunch. I mean, he takes a bite of the sandwich, then a bite of the pickle, then another bite of the sandwich, and another bite of the pickle, but it's only when he's finished both that he feels satisfied. Gentlemen, you're asking for one hell of a big pickle." And with that, he sat down. The room was completely quiet because nobody had any idea what he was talking about. But after a few moments, there was a little bit of laughter in the back, and the laughter built and built and built until a roar swept through the hall. I suspect the laughter came from the ridiculous comparison of a multi-million-dollar development to what is a rather silly food. But a pickle also means a difficult situation, and the townspeople got the message. From that point on, the development was known as one hell of a big pickle. When the vote was called, the zoning variance was soundly defeated. A mere story overcame the formidable resources and impeccable logic of the developers. Now, while the developers very well may have existed outside of the minds of the townspeople, what was going on inside their minds determined how they thought and felt about the development. But how could a simple story about a pickle change that so profoundly? It just didn't seem reasonable, and it wasn't. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio scanned the brains of subjects playing a simple gambling game. and found that they made their decisions emotionally. If reason had any role at all to play, it was as an after-the-fact justification for a decision that had already been made. Stories are thoughts wrapped in emotions. So the pickle story went right at the decision-making of the townspeople. A story is told by Michael Gazzaniga about being called in for a consultation at Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital in New York City. The patient had a lesion in the area of her brain responsible for location in space, but all of her other cognitive functioning was just fine. After about 15 minutes of the standard diagnostic questioning, Gazzaniga asked her where she was. She responded, "Doctor, I know you're not going to believe me because the other doctors don't, but I'm in my house in Freeport, Maine." "Well, if you're in your house," Gazzaniga asked, "how do you explain that bank of elevators outside the door?" Without missing a beat, she answered, "You have no idea the amount of time and money it took me to have those installed." Now, clearly, she was making it up as she was going along, but it was real to her. Gazzaniga believes we all make it up as we go along, that our reason is no more than a story we tell ourselves, and the physical world of bricks and mortar conforms to it. Now, when I'm in a discussion with someone, I recognize that they're probably telling themselves a story that is immune to my reasoning. And I know that I'm telling a story that is immune to theirs. Hopefully, it makes me just a little bit more open-minded. But thinking that we're rational calculators of costs and benefits is an illusion not all that different from those of my patients in the mental hospital. We are storytellers, but some of us tell more comfortable stories than others. If we encounter a story that's more attractive, we take it as our own. A study at Princeton in 2010 found that when we're listening to a story, our brains begin to mirror the same pattern of activation as the storyteller. If we encounter a more attractive story, we're going to take it as ours. And the most attractive stories are aspirational. All great leaders tell an aspirational narrative with the promise of a transformation at the end, one that we're even willing to sacrifice to attain. Advertisers have long sold us an aspiration, ours if we buy their product. Those of us with too much disposable income aren't immune, and will buy the product even when the promised transformation is beyond the bounds of reason. Steve Jobs understood that story is our user interface, and he built the most valuable company in the world by turning it into theater. Those of us that own an iPhone probably still hold on to the attractively designed box, even if there's no reason to. It's a chapter in the story Apple is telling the customer. The next chapter, opening the box. When you hold the top of the iPhone box, it takes precisely 7 seconds for the bottom to drop out. Apple calls it the box drop test, and all of their packaging must pass it. Why the delay? Apple wants to build anticipation, just like the suspense in a story, so that the climax of your aspiration for that new phone is as satisfying as it can possibly be. I'm a storyteller in the corporate world, helping my clients create and tell narratives because they fill in the details business plans leave out, and they're far more engaging. A set of objectives can only cover so much of what people need to do, but an aspirational narrative ensures that everyone knows what to do in every situation. Like not just creating a package for a product, but creating an experience for a customer that builds loyalty. The story the organization tells itself is its culture, and the best leaders make it their top priority to shape it. A story is so much more than just a simple anecdote to illustrate a point. A story is a lens to view the world and a lever to transform it. Knowing that stories drive reason enables us to use reason to drive stories. We can infer the story that others are telling, and then we can shape ours so that we attain the outcomes that we need, everything is fair game for the storytelling mind, including itself. While we are the story we tell ourselves, we can consciously decide to tell another. Tell ourselves a story about how confident, talented, and contented we are, and that's who we'll become. The more we tell it, the more it's embedded in neural networks, and the more it becomes our reality. So the answer to my childhood question, what is real, is the story we choose to tell ourselves. And we might as well tell it so we all live happily ever after. Thank you.